Yeah, I'll react to that, sure. I'm so freaking ready. Let's do this, guys. History March, fantastic channel. Preemptive like, original link to the video, top of the description. My name's Connor, if you're new. Hello, I'm from America. Father of modern warfare, Battle of Breitenfeld, 1631, Gustavus Adolphus, masterpiece. I love Gustavus Adolphus for no other reason that I've been drawn to him in other history videos. Just as I've been drawn to Napoleon, to Hannibal, Gustavus is just one of those guys that stands out to me. Let's go.
It is late afternoon on the 17th of September, 1631.
Sorry. Get ready. If you are not ready to learn, you're in the wrong class. Home ec is down the hall. Or sit in the back. That's fine. Let's go. Start.
It is late afternoon on the 17th of September, 1631, and from his command center on the Galgenberg Ridge, north of the village of Breitenfeld, Johann Zerklaas, Count of Tilly, senses the arrival of his moment to execute an advance.
I remember Tilly. I remember this guy. He was good.
His bold and audacious commander, Gottfried Heinrich Graf zu Pappenheim, has been launching cavalry sorties on their enemy's right wing for more than 2 hours, until he can see that the attacks are finally making a mark on the Swedish line, drawing central units wide to conduct countermeasures. It appears to Tilly that these maneuvers have left the Saxon army opposite his own right flank, separated from their more formidable Swedish allies. And with one great push against them, the battlefield will belong to him. More than 10 years of war in the Holy Roman Empire has seen almost invariable Catholic victory, and with this advance, Tilly will add one more great triumph to history. His officers bawl commands to their multinational force of Germans, Spanish, Walloons, Italians, Croats, and Hungarians, and the drummers of the Imperial Army build to a crescendo.
Just let me go back like 15 seconds, guys. I had to fix a thing.
To history. His officers bawl commands to their multinational force of Germans, Spanish, Walloons, Italians, Croats, and Hungarians, and the drummers of the Imperial Army build to a crescendo. The tercios descend from the hill. Their ranks are 40 to 50 deep, and the smallest units are made up of no fewer than 1,000 men. These packed imperial formations are supported by regiments of cuirassier cavalry. On the opposite side, the mobile Swedish artillery of King Gustavus Adolphus shows the effectiveness for which he has already become famed across the continent, firing on the advance with rapid order and even more deadly accuracy. The guns rip holes in the huge imperial tercios, blasting through their tightly packed ranks and opening them like a leaking sponge. To the consternation of the Swedes and the alarm of the Saxons, Tilly's forces do not stop their march. They do not even waver when a score of men are exploded by one ball, and then the same number a moment later by a second. The drums rattle ever louder. The Elector John Georg and Gustavus Adolphus watch the rear ranks of Tilly's army march over the body parts of their former comrades.
Jesus Christ. John Georg? Is that how you say George in Scandinavian? Is George a Scandinavian name? Just sounds like such a British name. That description was horrifying.
John Georg and Gustavus Adolphus watch the rear ranks of Tilly's army march over the body part.
Imagine your friend, like like that you talk to and everything, like just gets exploded right next to you, and you just have to keep marching.
Of their former comrades. The ranks of Tilly's army march over the body parts of their former comrades toward the Saxon line. The glinting pikes and smoldering muskets remain raised in precision. The field fills with dust.
I'm sorry, guys, question. Do you think that they would purposely separate friends from each other just so that seeing them die wouldn't have some negative effect on the formation? I've never thought of that before. Kind of like how you separate two friends in a all right, sorry.
The glinting pikes and smouldering muskets remain raised in precision. The field fills with dust and the smoke of the guns, obscuring the advance somewhat from the Swedes and hiding the fate of their allies. What is curious to them is that the cleaved Imperial troops make no sound themselves. The field is oddly devoid of the wails of the injured and dying, even as yet another Swedish cannonball rends a gaping hollow in one of General Gallas's tercios. Instead, there is the sound of chanting, of prayers, of Tilly's name. The smoke and dust of the battlefield mingles with the sharp, pungent odor of blood and visceral gore. The smell creates a terrible incense that brings to mind for the Protestants the hated Catholic Mass. This is a sacrifice brought to vivid life, a black ritual,
Christ.
the giving of life so that those who come after will reign forever.
Jesus Christ, History March. Chill out. No, I love it, but that's... Okay.
The giving of life so that those who come after will reign forever. The pall descends just as Tilly's tercios and his cavalry under Furstenberg on the far right are about to make contact with the Saxons. Swedish generals frantically rush to carry out their monarch's orders. Field Marshal Count Gustav Horn orders the front-line cavalry protecting his left wing to march wide on the left, and then brings his reserve dragoons and cuirassiers forward. With infantry marching between the mounted units to make a consolidated line, the shroud of battlefield fog lifts like a blanket and reveals an utterly transformed theater of war. The Saxons have left the field, retreating in panic towards the Loberbach stream, which the Protestants crossed earlier with so much difficulty. Not only that, but the Saxons have failed to spike their guns, with the result that the Imperials are able to turn fire on their fleeing backs and the improvised Swedish line. Worse,
Failed to spike their guns, as in disable them, and so the army could turn them around and use them against them, right?
of all, backs and the improvised Swedish line. Worst of all for the King of Sweden, now hard-pressed under the artillery of two armies, the escape of the Saxons has destroyed the numerical superiority that he enjoyed at the outset of the battle, and which was almost a prerequisite of his facing the tactical brilliance of Tilly. To the Imperial forces, the hitherto invincible Swedes are now outnumbered, outgunned, and very quickly they will be outmaneuvered. For Tilly has made certain that his cavalry are only to break the Saxon line and then immediately regroup for the envelopment of the Swedes. Rubbing his gloved hands together in satisfaction, on this day he will triumph over a king. The guns roar once more,
Tilly.
and the smoke descends on the Protestant cause. Some of my long-time subscribers know that I've been hitting the...
Guys, so this is, you can fast forward if you want, but I'm going to play through the ad. It just seems right. If you do watch through and you're interested in what he's promoting here, make sure to use any promo codes and links. Original link, top description. Please, guys, it's only right.
Elevated blood pressure
if you're interested.
But going 40 to 50 kilometers per week with closed headphones can get really sweaty and cause itching and irritation. I rarely used earbuds before, but after trying these little buggers from Raycon, I could hardly believe how comfortable they are. The overall quality is really good. The build, the sound, the look, active noise noise cancellation, 32-hour battery life, multi-point connectivity with 2 devices at once. All these features rival some of the biggest names in premium audio, but Raycon does it for half the price. They slot comfortably in the ear with these optimized gel tips, and they don't fall out no matter how bumpy things get. Then there's the convenience of quick charging in case you forget to charge them, so you can just plug them in for 10 minutes to get 90 minutes of battery life. They've also got this cool-looking protective case. Really cool design, and it complements the earbuds perfectly. I'd recommend anyone to get Raycon, even if you use earbuds just casually. And with Black Friday coming up, my viewers can scoop them up with a massive discount. Go to buyraycon.com/historymarsh today.
Use the
to get
/historymarsh if you're interested.
Off site-wide. That's right, you get up to 30% off everything on Raycon's website when visiting buyraycon.com/historymarsh.
I need to face my chair more directly so my neck doesn't always hurt. Ooh, Matt. Ottomans. Oh my god.
The northern stretches of what are today Eastern Germany and Western Poland are rent with screams, terror and fire at the outset of the 1631 campaign season. After negotiating a treaty of alliance with Richelieu's France in the town of Barwald during the winter, King Gustavus Adolphus moves out the next month toward Mecklenburg with the count.
I'm sorry, guys.
With Richelieu's France. After negotiating a treaty of alliance with Richelieu's France in the town of Barwald during the winter, King Gustavus Adolphus moves out the next month toward Mecklenburg, with the Count of Tilly wasting no time in moving from Frankfurt on the Oder to meet him. The Swedish king avoids the imperial force and instead moves toward Demmin, occupying it, while at the same time Tilly captures New Brandenburg, putting its garrison of mixed Swedes and Scottish soldiers to the sword, along with ransacking the wealthy town of anything that could be put to use by his forces. After this, Tilly moves on and puts the...
It's got to be such a nerve-wracking... it's war. Of course it's nerve-wracking. But having to decide between, if it's obvious they're coming through, then burning everything makes an easier decision. But if it's right on the cusp of like, I don't want to burn everything that's mine, I'm not positive they're going to come and take here, and so deciding whether to do scorched earth or not is got to be nerve-wracking. It's war. Everything's nerve-wracking.
The town by his forces. After this, Tilly moves on and puts the town of Magdeburg under siege. Determined to answer this action, but still unwilling to face Tilly in the open, Adolphus instead moves his forces in an unexpected direction, south, where he eventually puts his army into position around Tilly's former headquarters at Frankfurt on the Oder.
Is he doing a precursor or something, guys? 844.
Group for the envelopment section on the hitting the guns roar once more, and the smoke descends on the Protestant cause. Some of my effort on the Oder. Tilly's former headquarters at Frankfurt on the Oder. On word reaching him of this development at Magdeburg, Tilly moves with a section of his army to try and lift the siege, but the city falls to the Swedes before he can complete the march. The Swedes give Frankfurt the same treatment as was given to the Protestants at New Brandenburg, and when Tilly arrives back at Magdeburg with tens of thousands of reinforcements, the violent aftermath of its fall surpasses all of the previous incidents. Magdeburg is
engraving from Theatrum Europaeum, showing the fighting for Magdeburg's defense works.
Burnt and its inhabitants massacred for days until Tilly gives the order that his forces are to cease their devastation. From a population of 25,000 prior to the siege, perhaps as many as 20,000 of the city's inhabitants are put to death. While
Jesus
Tilly is
Christ.
reinforced with armies from Italy and southern Germany, Gustavus Adolphus is forced to take defensive measures along the Elbe and Havel, before settling on Verben as the center, where he will mass his offensive forces and march to engage Tilly.
Hey, Berlin.
Honor dictates now that Adolphus confront Tilly.
So was Berlin not as big of a deal?
After all, honor dictates
not
now
important.
that Adolphus
Not important. My brain goes to stupid freaking ADHD things that aren't important right now.
to engage Tilly. Honor dictates now that Adolphus confront Tilly. He is, after all, operating in Germany as the defender of Protestantism, and his reputation will suffer if Magdeburg goes unanswered. At the same time, the horrendousness of the Magdeburg massacre has handed Adolphus and the Protestant cause a propaganda victory, for there is little incentive now for Protestants to surrender or trust in the security of the imperial forces.
Yep.
The Swedes also shift much of the responsibility for the disaster onto the Elector of Saxony, whom they said could have saved the city had he wished. Saxony and its elector, John Georg I, has thus far remained aloof from the fighting, but its geographical position means that it will soon need to make a decision on whether to join the Swedes or the Imperials, lest the decision be made for it.
To be fair, he's not in an enviable position. In both senses of the word.
As early as June, Tilly is operating within the electorate to induce John Georg to come onto the Emperor's side, and he places Leipzig under siege. Its inhabitants and the rest of Saxony quake at the thought of their city falling prey to the same fate as Magdeburg. The elector's situation is complicated by the fact that while he is a Protestant, he also does not wish to see other Protestant German states like Brandenburg grow in power from the war. While he is making his decision,
I would have thought that's an interesting insight right there, because it really that's interesting because it gives you an insight into thinking that it's not just a purely like judgment, like end times Protestant versus Catholic. That's the war. The fact that he's actually thinking still, a Protestant person in Protestant area is thinking still about not going against the Catholics because of another state, of worrying about another state's power still. That gives a lot of insight to me into just that these times weren't just pure absolute Catholic versus Protestant hatred, and there was some I said it best I could.
To join power from the war. While he is making his decision to join Tilly or Adolphus, Count Gottfried zu Pappenheim, who has been left with a force at Magdeburg by Tilly, decides unilaterally at the start of July to make an attempt on the Swedish lines along the Elbe. The Swedish army throws him back without difficulty and then resumes the consolidation of forces at Verben. In an effort to shore up his commander's position,
I heard it.
Tilly marches back north, his army replenished by the looting of Saxony, and he and Pappenheim link up for another march on Verben in early August. On a misty morning, Tilly attempts an assault on the walls of the fortress, but a change in the weather reveals the advance, and he calls off the attack with some losses.
Imagine a misty or foggy battlefield coupled with the smoke from the guns. Has got to be just like a complete smoke bomb battlefield.
That reveals the advance, and he calls off the attack with some losses. For the next 2 successive days, Tilly arrays his army in battle formation before Verben, but Gustavus Adolphus refuses to meet him. Faced with the realities of feeding tens of thousands of men, Tilly withdraws once more into Saxony and renews the campaign of pillage. With his army supplied by looted Saxon goods, the Elector under pressure by the siege of Leipzig, as well as the arrival of another army under General Egon Furstenberg Heiligenberg, Tilly is in a dominant but not decisive position. He has very resolutely placed the onus on Gustavus Adolphus and Elector John Georg to act, and in the second week of September, with Leipzig nearing the end of its tether, Saxony joins the Swedish alliance. Leipzig falls 3 days later on the 14th, but by that time, the Swedish army is already marching from Verben with the monarch at its head. Their combined forces likely exceeding 35,000 men, possibly even as high as 40,000. The Allied Protestant army is assured in its capability to face Tilly's experienced but numerically smaller force. With his own Allied contingents, Tilly's army likely exceeds 30,000, but he is banking on his men's confidence following 10 years of unbroken victory, coupled with the latest triumphs in the capture of the major strongholds in Leipzig and Magdeburg before it, to overcome the deficit in an open battle. The day after Leipzig's fall, the 15th of September, John Georg and Gustavus Adolphus formally join forces at Döben-Wittenberg. At Leipzig, Tilly plays the waiting game, as there are another 15,000 soldiers moving north to reinforce him under the command of Johann, Count Aldringen, and with that, he is convinced that victory will fall for their side. He differs with his senior commanders in this approach, and they are keen, to the point of insubordination, to engage with the Protestant army as
It doesn't even seem like a difficult decision. Of course, Tilly's right.
Point of insubordination, to engage with the Protestant army as soon as possible. Pappenheim,
Because they don't want them to run away.
again leads a semi-sanctioned sortie north, riding at the head of a force of 2,000 cavalrymen to reconnoiter the Swedish Saxon forces. But with his characteristic negligence of chain of command, he engages the Swedish advance units and then holds his ground instead of withdrawing back to the main
Oh my god,
force.
he's a liability.
His dispatches to Tilly paint his situation as very precarious, and unwilling to lose thousands of his best cavalry, Tilly is compelled to order an advance. Breaking the rule of war to fight only on ground of your own choosing, Tilly moves 5 miles north and reinforces Pappenheim in the area of
Warfare where, like, you get... Obviously, there's going to be disagreement in how you go about battling. But warfare where, like, one side, or, like, one portion of your side can just be like, I'm just going ahead and doing this. It seems like such a foreign concept.
breaking the rule of war to fight only on ground of your own choosing, Tilly moves 5 miles north and reinforces Pappenheim in the area of Breitenfeld village. The Protestant forces are about 10 miles north.
There's the namesake
Swedish
of the
king
video.
gives the order to march the next day, and by the morning of the 17th, the two immense armies are just 3 miles apart. While Tilly's army moves into formation north of Breitenfeld village, the Swedish and Saxon armies are coming south and crossing the Loberbach River
Are they
toward the village of Podelwitz.
the battle is gonna take place within these two rivers here?
That the Protestant forces will be struggling to traverse the barrier. Aware that the Protestant forces will be struggling to traverse the barrier, as well as the marsh ground that surrounds its banks, Tilly sends Imperial cavalry to harass and possibly even halt the enemy advance. But unsupported by infantry, these flying columns are seen off by concentrated musket fire. The Protestant army continues through and around Podelwitz village, and eventually the Saxon units on the far left wing are brushing the outskirts of Gobschowitz. Tilly, meanwhile, has used the time given by the river crossing and the cavalry harassment to deploy on a wide ridge overlooking the plain below. His army is organized in a single line, with the artillery placed in the front and most of the cavalry on the wings. A third cavalry unit is placed behind the center.
This is a battlefield where if I'm the loser, I am very scared because it doesn't seem like a lot of easy places to run and retreat.
The tercios ranks are very close-knit and vary between units of 1,000 and 1,500 men, mixed with muskets and pikemen. The larger units are likely 50 men across, with 30 ranks in depth. Across the field, the Saxons are organized in a similarly traditional fashion to the multinational Catholic army, but the Swedes to their right are using a wholly novel formation. By this bright September morning in 1631, Gustavus Adolphus has reigned as king and commander-in-chief of Sweden for more than 20 years. His military doctrine and the lessons of his early wars against Russia, Denmark, and Poland have been absorbed and harmonized into his ranks and its command structure. The meritocratic officer corps and his obsession with training and drill render inconsequential the fact that this Swedish army is in fact mostly composed of German and Scottish auxiliaries. It moves as a cohesive whole, and its tactics and formation are geared in every respect to the goals of maneuverability and concentrated, overwhelming firepower. The philosophy and focus on initiative at the operational level in the Swedish army would be as familiar to a Roman centurion of the 2nd century as to a member of the Prussian general staff under Moltke in the 19th. This difference in approaches at Breitenfeld would have been readily apparent as Pappenheim, the contrary and insubordinate throwback to a former age, took his place in command of the imperial left wing.
Pappenheim, man.
The Swedish army is deployed into 2 main lines rather than a single broad force, and each of
It's like a pawn against the
these
queen.
lines to 2 main lines rather than a single broad force, and each of these lines has reserve forces to their rear, giving their commanders options as well as strength in depth. While the Swedes also place the greater number of their artillery in a central battery, it is policy for companies and regiments to deploy their own field pieces, and the second line of mixed infantry and cavalry are equipped with further heavy weapons. Firearms and artillery in the Swedish army also have standardized calibers, allowing for mass production, rapid supply, and a terrific rate of fire in the field, a great advantage over the multinational gauges and weapons used by Tilly's force. Another difference between the forces is the smaller size of the Swedish units. Cavalry squadrons and infantry companies can
Sorry,
the Swedish force. Another difference between the forces is the smaller size of the Swedish units. Cavalry squadrons and infantry companies can be positioned on the battlefield independently, but they are also trained to link up and form mobile regiments to attack in force. Rather than separating the infantry in the center and cavalry on the wings, the forces are combined with deliberate gaps left in the shallow ranks.
that is going to be so difficult to train, though, because how do you train them to in the madness of battle, in the mayhem, chaos of battle, to know and look, be like, is it time? Is it time? Do we switch here? So how do you replicate that in a training scenario? Maybe you just have to learn from in actual battle scenarios.
So that infantry can reinforce with deliberate gaps left in the shallow ranks, so that infantry can reinforce and shelter cavalry units, and vice versa. Looking at
Exactly. How do you
cavalry units, and vice versa. Looking at the two tremendous hosts, the single largest collection of forces on a battlefield in more than a decade of war, It is apparent to both commanders that not only would two religions and two military leaders pit their strength against one another on this day, it would be two different military systems and doctrines, indeed two philosophies of warfare going toe-to-toe. It begins, however, as most set-piece battles of the age, with an artillery duel. The impact of the Swedish military doctrine makes itself obvious immediately. While Tilly's artillery consists of 27 pieces placed in one battery, the Swedes have close to 70, while the Saxons have brought a dozen pieces to add to the Protestant barrage. Still more damaging than the Swedes' advantage in numbers was their rate of fire. For every one round fired at the Protestant line, the Swedes are firing 3 in response. Not only that, but Tilly's densely packed tercios are afflicted in greater proportion than the spaced-out Swedish units. The cannonade continues for 2 hours, while the soldiers of all 3 armies are forced to endure the ordeal of hearing their comrades.
Oh my god. All right, of course being hit would be the worst case scenario, okay? But imagine the anxiety and of standing in line for 2 hours knowing that actually the cannonball is probably traveling faster than sound. So I was about to say that any shot could be going for your head. I guess you'd be exploded before you even hear it. Just knowing that any second your life could just be like lights out, or maybe worse, your legs blown off or something like that. 2 hours, that is agony.
Screams, witnessing their sudden endure the ordeal of hearing their comrades' screams.
That's why I wonder if there's any precautions taken into place to like see who's friendly with one another and maybe remove them and spread them throughout the line so that it doesn't affect them as much and they can stay in
their sudden deaths and the mental torture of knowing that the merciless guns might annihilate them at any moment.
Exactly. 2 hours.
Tilly is now in a quandary. It is he who occupies the high ground, giving him the advantage in the event of a push by the Protestant enemy. On the other hand, his army are suffering twice as many casualties as their opponents, and neither the Swedes...
I would just be standing there for 2 hours, just like, just please no, for 2 hours.
Nor the Saxons are showing any indication that they wish to move and begin a disadvantageous attack on Tilly's position on the Galgenberg. Yet again, it is Pappenheim who drives the action forward in a completely unauthorized maneuver. He is in command of over 5,000 men, compromising the entirety of the imperial left wing, most prominently a mixture of German with some Spanish and Walloon cuirassier regiments. Pappenheim leads these thousands of cavalrymen in a glorious medieval-style charge at the Swedish positions on the left, swinging around to try and avoid the myriad and shellacking fire from their guns. This is not an easy task, given that the Swedish system is built upon using maneuverable guns issued to each unit, allowing them to quickly realign and fire on the highly visible mass of cavalrymen charging toward them. Despite their numbers, Pappenheim cannot penetrate the Swedish line, so instead he employs the caracole tactic, by which the cuirassiers ride in an arc within pistol range of the Swedish line, discharge their firearms, and then continue riding in a sweep. After his experiences in the Polish War, Gustavus Adolphus has already come to the conclusion that the caracole is a useless maneuver, as if the cavalry are within pistol range of the line, then they are most certainly within range of the Swedish musketeers and big guns. The Swedish right, where the king is positioned and in overall command, but with General Johan Barner commanding almost 9,000 infantrymen, deliver a resounding reply to Pappenheim in precise order. A crippling blitz that shocks the cavalry and forces them to withdraw without further ado. Under Furstenberg and Colonel Johann Ludwig Hector von Isolani, the multinational force of German, Hungarian, Croat and Italian cavalry moves toward the Saxon army with ample infantry support. Without mobile guns and the honed defensive tactics of the Swedes, some of the Saxon cavalry units put up resistance, but they are routed from the field, killed or simply implode under the pressure of the titanic offensive. On the Imperial left, Pappenheim is continuing to keep the Swedes and their king occupied with two more frontal attacks, both of which are repulsed by heavy fire. By now, the field is dense with the smoke of cannon and small arms, making it harder for any one individual to discern precisely what is happening from minute to minute. Undeterred, Pappenheim regroups again and decides...
Maybe if your friend was next to you and he got... Maybe that would make you more kind of courageous. Sorry.
Undeterred, Pappenheim regroups again and decides this time to alter his approach of attack.
Smart.
At the same time, with the Saxon army wavering, Tilly decides that his strategy of kettling the Protestant wings and squeezing the center before a final bulldozing of the enemy is coming to pass. And with the momentum of the fighting behind him, he gives the order for a general advance. Tilly's central tercios, numbering in the region of 20,000 men alone, begin marching forward. Their target, the fragile Saxon infantry, and the Swedish units under the command of Count Gustav Horn that stand next to them. The Imperial front line is 2 miles in length, and its approach has a ruinous effect on the hard-pressed Saxon infantry. They begin to fall away, first in ones and twos, then in groups, and finally entire units are fleeing the field. Even their king, the Elector John Georg, is powerless to halt the panic. Just 2 units of the Saxon army, those of Torb, and in groups, and fight to fall away on the hard-pressed Saxon infantry. They begin to fall away, first in ones and twos, then in groups, and finally entire units are fleeing the field. Even their king, the Elector John Georg, is powerless to halt the panic. Just 2 units of the Saxon army, those of Torb and Arnhem, move in good order and take cover behind the Swedish left wing, maintaining their ranks and reorganizing to continue the fight. The Tercio's steadfast movement in their oblique march toward the enemy line is not without its toll. The Swedish guns continually tear wide swathes through their ranks, every round taking scores of men on impact. While Pappenheim makes another arcing charge at Gustavus Adolphus's position on the left, the main body of Tilly's force reach the Saxons' former line, take possession of their guns, and then begin a massed about turn. So far, all is going to plan, as Furstenberg and von Isolani stop their cavalry from cutting down the rushing Saxons and bring them around to what they anticipate will be the end game as they crush the Swedes in a side attack. A fog of war has descended, with the dry, churned field kicking up clouds of dirt from the boots of tens of thousands of Saxons and Imperials. It mingles with the already cloying penumbra of gunpowder smoke to obscure the Swedish lines. All is going to plan, but moving the vast tercios under fire is akin to turning a leviathan, and the minutes begin to elapse as the barrage continues from the near invisible Swedish lines. On the Swedish side, counter-operations are being swiftly put in place. The commander there, Horn, a decades-long veteran who has studied modern military tactics in the Netherlands, recognizes the danger when he sees that the Saxon line is breaking. He immediately dispatches a report to the king and gives orders that his second line, a mini-army in itself consisting of cavalry, infantry and artillery, move out to the left and widen the Swedish flank. All of the elements of Gustavus Adolphus's doctrine are encapsulated in the move, from the initiative shown by Horn in reacting to the developing situation on the battlefield before him, to the presence of ample reserves and weaponry in the Swedish ranks, to reform and in effect build a new left wing for their forces. When the smoke and dust clears and the tercios and imperial cavalry are facing the Swedes, they are presented with an intact and well-rested front line, rather than a vulnerable flank. The king also receives Horn's dispatch and personally moves to the center to begin funneling additional reserves to the threat. While Swedish cavalry rides against Furstenbergs and disrupts his attempt to forestall Horn's deployment, a Colonel Kaldenbach leads his regiment in a full charge at the imperial line. It is a
this right here is going to determine the battle. I'm guessing. Like, whoever comes on top here will either fold in here or fold out here.
Charge without a hope of success, but Kaldenbach's sacrifice gives the Swedes more time to bring their reserves into the new line and present a much stronger front for the coming offensive. Horn converts the ditches on the north-south road that travels down to Leipzig into defensive trenches, adding to the formidable fire and manpower at his disposal. Undaunted by this remarkable development, Tilly and his commanders begin what they wish to be the final foray. For fully 1 hour, Tilly's tercios and cavalry run into the carnage mill of the Swedish lines, while the Swedes hold their positions heroically against the more numerous Imperials. Grape shot and muskets splinter and shred the deep Imperial lines, creating excruciating and deadly ripples of pain along the front of the massed units. It is the guns that make the difference, for even though Furstenberg and Tilly have commandeered the Saxon artillery, they cannot close the infantry on the Swedish lines with their mobile and rapid-firing cannon. Bizarrely, as tens of thousands of Swedes, Germans and continental Europeans from Hungary to Spain reel with exhaustion, death and awful injuries, the sound of bagpipes rings across the field as Colonel John Hepburn seeks to rally the Scots on the Swedish lines with a lively jig. The tide turns irrevocably sometime around 4 o'clock when the king orders Johan Banner to lead a counter-charge against the now exhausted and ravaged force of Pappenheim. Riding at full gallop and firing pistols in the saddle before drawing sabers immediately after, Banner runs Pappenheim's cavalry from the field. The infantry that are left behind form a tercio, but without mobile support, the Swedes begin the grim task of wearing it down.
Game over.
Tilly, his forces now fully committed to the action on the Swedish left wing and injured himself, is unable to offer any reserves or assist the now isolated remnants of Pappenheim's force. Adolphus sees his own opportunity. Once his right wing has regrouped and Pappenheim's last forces have either been annihilated or fled back toward Breitenfeld or the Galgenberg, he gives the order for them and his frontline units in the center to arc to the left and begin a flanking maneuver on Tilly. The Swedes move out with the king riding amongst his own regiments. Units occupy Tilly's former command center on the Galgenberg and overpower the remainder of Pappenheim's force there. The Imperial Artillery Battery is next to be captured, and while the Swedish and Scottish contingents prepare to turn them on their previous owners, Lieutenant Colonel Kurt Soup links his cavalry with that of Horn, and the merged regiments charge Tilly's reserve cavalry unit, which is forming the left of the main Imperial force. They drive the cavalry reserve into the midst of the main line, causing fierce disruption just as the Swedes begin to bombard Tilly's army with their own guns. They are now hemmed in and taking artillery fire from two directions, and their route south to Leipzig has been blocked by the Swedes on the Galgenberg. Nearly the entirety of Tilly's cavalry flees the field, and the infantry is left to attempt to hold on. Tilly, possibly concussed, refuses to order the retreat, even though he is now heavily wounded and even almost captured on at least one occasion.
Tilly's awesome. I gotta give it that.
It becomes clear that Imperial defeat is unavoidable. Pappenheim reappears on the battlefield and attempts to rally and marshal whatever mounted troops he can find to provide.
I dogged Pappenheim in the beginning, but he
Attempts to rally and marshal whatever mounted troops he can find to provide a screen for the Tercios' withdrawal. It is now late evening, and the light is beginning to fail. Many of the men on the field have been fighting or enduring artillery bombardment for 7 hours. For the Swedes, Horn and Hepburn lead simultaneous cavalry and infantry charges with support of troops sent by the king. The Tercios finally break, and a rout begins. Thousands of Imperial troops running toward the Linkenwald forest to the northeast. Pappenheim improvises a defense with 2 units he has managed to cobble together as a rear guard action, but the defeat is total. Tilly is saved by his own officers and manages to leave the field, but thousands die in the rout before the Swedes, themselves now exhausted by the hours of fighting, halt the pursuit as the night falls. As the news of the first major Protestant victory in over a decade of fighting is digested with amazement around Europe, what is not in dispute is that Sweden has now officially joined the League of Great Powers, and its king is not only the defender of his fellow congregants, but is also a military leader of visionary and assiduous genius. While Tilly and Pappenheim regroup and attempt to rebuild their broken and diminished forces, with their losses exceeding 13,000 in a single day's fighting, the Swedes spend the winter preparing for an invasion of the southern German states of the Empire. The Catholics' forces are far from defeated, but the future looks bright for the still young King Gustavus Adolphus and his professional and terrifyingly proficient army. The next year will dawn full of promise of a reign that will last for decades to come. If you like what you see, consider supporting my work on Patreon, and you get ad-free early access to my...
Pappenheim, you're okay. But fantastic. Tilly, fantastic. Obviously, Gustavus, fantastic. Tilly, I might have to even give the edge as just the best single. What do I know? All right, I'm still learning. Just give me my opinion. He still might be right now the best single person. I think I'd put him over Gustavus, maybe. And when it comes to because I don't see this as like a victory where like Gustavus was just clearly a genius. I see it as just the discipline of the Swedish and auxiliaries of those forces. And the smaller the groups you have with artillery, the better, as long as they have the training to do it. If you don't have the training and discipline, then it's probably better to focus your guns in a smaller group commanded by a few people. But I would think the more groups of individual groups of soldiers, the better if you have the discipline, and clearly the Swedish do. and that seemed to have been a very large tipping point. It just seems like they were a better overall. Tilly had Pappenheim as kind of a liability, even though Pappenheim seemed to do pretty well in the end, and especially with Pappenheim's actions at the end of the battle, clearly a courageous leader, or a courageous person, okay? So I don't want to dog him too much. Fantastic. Loved it. I don't watch a lot of TV or movie. This learning about history, guys, it sort of is like my TV. So I kind of get into it in that way, and this is a great episode. So that's kind of how I look at it. I love y'all. I hope you're all doing well. Would appreciate any comments down below. Did I say anything that was just completely wrong in your opinion? Tell me down below. Answering any of my questions. You guys are always awesome with that. I hope everyone's doing well, and hopefully I'll see you guys next time. We'll keep on learning. Bye, guys.